Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this discussion hosted by the Program on Extremism here at George Washington University. My name is Sergio Altuna. I'm a senior fellow here at the program, and I'm honored to moderate today's event titled Insurgent Resurgence, a discussion about the current developments in Syria. The structure of the event, for those of you that are not familiar, is quite simple. Uh, and we will run for approximately 1.5 hours. Each panelist will deliver a 10 to 15 minutes presentation on various aspects of the main topic. And following these presentations, we will transition into a Q&A session where our panelists will have the opportunity to address questions from the audience. We, of course, encourage you to actively participate by submitting your questions through the chat feature. We hope this interactive format allows for a very dynamic exchange of ideas and forces engagement between the speakers and the attendees. We look forward to your insightful queries. Now, allow me to introduce our guests in the order they will speak. Today, the program on extremism is really honored to host three highly skilled and knowledgeable speakers. First up is Mr. Al-Hakam Sha'ar, who is an urban sociologist working with the Aleppo Project. He's a linguist and a researcher of urban conflict, migration, and cultural heritage. And he's in fact, the longest serving researcher of the Aleppo Project. He has also contributed recently to several research projects on preserving Aleppian cultural heritage as part of the UCLA's Modern Endangered Archives program, as well as with the SVR Berlin's project mapping Syrian diaspora organizations in Germany. Be welcome. Ahlan wa sahlan, ya Hakam. Second will be Mr. Jérôme Drebon, who's a senior analyst on jihad and modern conflict and the International Crisis Group. He has published extensively on Syrian jihadis and the political transformation. A very timely example of which is From Jihad to Politics, How Syrian Jihadis Embrace Politics. A book, of course, I highly encourage you to buy and read. And last, but of course not least, we have with us today Mr. Wafiq Al-Shalal, who is a political counselor at the Embassy of the Republic of Iraq here in the United States. Prior to this, Mr. Al-Shalal undertook various responsibilities in the field of counterterrorism at the Iraqi Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Also, welcome everybody. See Wafiq as well. Marhaba. I am, as you can see, really excited to facilitate this timely event. Well, thanks to of course, again, I'd like to thank our our esteemed panelists. Allow me just to offer a brief introduction before giving the stage to our knowledgeable guests. The recent fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime definitely marks a pivotal moment in Syria's modern history, offering both opportunities and immense challenges for the country's future. The ousting of Assad's regime, though monumental, is only the latest chapter in a conflict that has lasted over a decade and reshaped not only Syria but also the broader Middle East. At this juncture, if I may say, it is important to recognize the extraordinary resilience, of the Syrian people who have endured unimaginable suffering and have made immense sacrifices throughout this conflict in the pursuit of a better future. Because I mean, let's put in context the scale of what Syria has endured. Over 13 years of conflict, millions displaced internally and externally, countless communities torn apart by violence, sectarianism, and foreign intervention. Although, as an indicator, it cannot really measure the pain or the destruction. The human cost itself is staggering, with total deaths estimated around 600,000 as of the first quarter of this year, if I recall correctly. The collapse of the Assad regime does not mark the end of these struggles, of course. Rather, it signals the beginning of a new phase, a new, a new chapter full of questions, right? At the heart of today's discussion lies the role of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, an organization which, although it carries the burden of its origins as Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria, has somehow defied a simple categorization, now claiming to represent a third way, sorry, that remains a bit unknown. HCS is, without a doubt, I'll say, a hardcore Islamist organization, yet also one that has shown signs of pragmatic adaptation, balancing ideological commitment with political and military expediency, albeit, of course, at a very local, regional level. As the leading faction in the latest offensive, and now the main organization of the Syrian transitional government, HTS role and nature is, of course, under scrutiny. Knowing both its past and the transformations that have taken place within it, what kind of actor can we expect to find in the near future? Or how is it different from other Islamist organizations that have participated in the offensive? How far are they, or if I may say better, how far have they moved away from global jihadism? Now, these questions, which are not only academic, I think, will have profound implications for the stability of Syria and the region. And of course, just focusing solely on HTS would risk oversimplifying the broader picture. The Syrian conflict has long been shaped by a web of external interests. It's pursuing its own agenda. Iran, through its network of militias, has sought to maintain influence and secure strategic corridors to the Mediterranean. Russia, of course, having invested heavily in Assad's survival, now faces the challenge of recalibrating its role in the region. Turkey, who continues to balance its support for positioned forces with its support to the Syrian National Army to extend its buffer zone by pushing back Kurdish forces. And of course, the United States, though less visibly engaged, it remains a critical player, particularly in the ongoing fight against Daesh. Because, well, although the withdrawal remains a subject of debate, the US maintains approximately 900 troops, if I remember correctly, across several small outposts in Syria, where they continue to train Kurdish militias and support operations aimed at preventing ISIS from regenerating, right? This geopolitical chessboard complicates any vision of a peaceful transition. External powers often prioritize their own strategic objectives over the needs of the Syrian people. Yet, the long-term stability of Syria and the Middle East cannot be achieved without addressing the human dimension of this conflict. The Syrian people, whether in Aleppo, Idlib, or the diaspora, shall remain at the center of this crisis. Their resilience in the face of war, displacement, and economic collapse has been extraordinary. However, as the country transitions, they face new challenges. How can the voices be amplified in a political landscape dominated by armed groups and foreign actors, as we've mentioned? How can the rights and identities of Syria's diverse minorities be protected in a fragile and polarized environment? These questions are as urgent as they are complex, of course, and the answers will not come easily, but they are critical to envisioning, in my opinion, a Syria that's not only stable but also inclusive and just. Now, without further delay, to begin exploring these pressing issues, I'm honored to give the floor to Mr. Al-Hakam Sha'ar, or Hakam Sha'ar, who specializes on urban conflict, migration, and cultural heritage, as I've said before. Mr. Shah is born and raised in Aleppo, Halab, and his family had to quit their house and the quarter of Aleppo in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. Their house being later destroyed by the regime. Al-Hakam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sergio, and hello, my dear fellow discussants and everyone attending. Thank you for giving me the platform. Yeah, big event. As you were saying, Sergio, what you've heard from your Syrian friends recently, that this is perhaps the biggest event in their life, and it might well be. I don't think I've lived anything as significant, as mind-altering. And mind you, we've been preparing for this for 14 years almost, since March 2011, when we started all across Syria in protests to try to reform this country, to make it more open, to make it democratic, to try out different forms of government, different people in power than what we've had since 1963, if we want to count the Ba'ath regime. With its sectarian tone, it was already in the 60s dominated by about 5 officers, 3 of whom were from the coastal area, Alawites, who kind of took advantage of their personal network and they entangled the Alawite community in Syria through patronage and through the doling out the privileges, which helped the Syrian regime to maintain its grip over power. And one of those 5 officers who led the coup in 1963 consolidated that power in 1970. His name was Hafez al-Assad. He ruled for 30 years since, until he handed over to his son in the year 2000. What people in my generation were living through is a Syria that's seemingly stable, but we knew there were so many limitations to what we can do and say. And we were told about that, and we were quickly confronted with that in our years of youth in high school. For instance, I remember when we tried once when the Americans invaded Iraq in 2003, we thought we would organize a protest in my high school, and we were told off because they said, you want to protest against the American invasion? Don't you worry, we organize these things. That's not for you to do. And indeed, they asked us to wait a couple of days until the Ba'ath Party organized its own massive protests in Aleppo, and we had to toe that line and join that protest instead. And I don't want to start talking about the thousands disappeared in the 80s, which rendered Syria a kind of kingdom of silence, as it's been referred to. People who would be detained for being rumored to have made a joke about Assad, or for saying God bless his soul over the death of somebody who was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood group, which was outlawed in Syria. So in 2011, we thought there's a moment. We've seen what happened in other countries. Perhaps we can. And we were very hesitant. We're like, okay, we know this is a different regime. Maybe we don't ask for the fall of the regime. We asked for reforming the regime for many months. We weren't asking for the resignation of Assad, but we were faced with fire. I remember in Aleppo, and I was kind of. I had to be silent for one whole minute, just thinking about what I was just explaining just a couple of days ago to a Syrian friend who had lived in Germany all her life, so she doesn't know what it's like in Syria. She was like, "Okay, now this is happening. So, did you ever see someone shot at in Aleppo?" Actually, the Syrian regime in 2011 and 12 was very careful not to upset Aleppo, because Aleppo took a kind of silent position, and because of the fear of what happened in the 80s, especially focused in Aleppo and Hama, where the Syrian regime murdered thousands of people and disappeared them in Syrian prisons. some of whom were released 16, 20 years later. Many were never heard from since. And so the regime was trying to appease Aleppo by not shooting at the protesters directly, which is what they did in other provinces like Dera, Homs. We have immense amounts of evidence showing people without a jaw where this sniper bullet explodes in the face. But what I saw in Aleppo, we for many months I was teaching English and doing my master's in teaching English back at the University of Aleppo, and I would be told by a friend that there would be a protest somewhere at certain hour, and no more details about it. You just have to go there and find out. A lot of time we would arrive there and we see maybe 30, 40 people, but none of us would dare start the protest, and we'd just go home. Other times I'd arrive and I would see someone being beaten up, and the rest freeze, and it depends. Either they don't do anything or disband, or there's a famous phrase, "Ifo, Ifo." So we were called the protesters of, we're not protesting, we're just saying, let him be, let him be. Ifo means just let him be. That was our call at that point in the protest. Just don't beat him up, don't take him to prison. And finally, we made it to one massive protest on the 30th of June 2011, and it was dubbed the volcano of Aleppo, because Aleppians had for so long wanted to protest, and finally they made it to the square. Not to the central square. We never made it to the central square of Aleppo, by the way, Saadallah al-Jabri Square. Never. That was a dream for Aleppians until now. The regime fell when we could celebrate in that square. But we made it to a neighborhood just west of Saadallah al-Jabri called Jamiliye. And I remember arriving at the scene. It was packed with wannabe protesters. All shops had closed in anticipation of this, because it became clear this was going to be a protest. And yet, for about 10 minutes, perhaps more, my time sense has changed now, perhaps less, but it felt like a long time, all these people just standing there, pretending that they're not here to protest. Imagine, we must have been anywhere between 500 and 1,000 people. I don't want to exaggerate and say we were 1,000. It was a wide street, and it was filled for perhaps 100 meters. And we were waiting for the brave one to start that protest. And some brave people were beaten in front of me, and all we could say is, Ifo, Ifo, let him be, let him be. But then it kicked in, and everybody finally, we were able to say, one, the Syrian people are one. The people want to bring down the regime. At that point, we were saying that. And there were people, I remember feeling like, that's not what I came out for, but sure, some people they said, قائدنا للأبد سيدنا Muhammad. At the end of the day, Syria is a majority Muslim country. Some people believe what that phrase meant. So our leader forever is Prophet Muhammad. That means not our leader forever is President Assad, because we were living in this sense of forever. In fact, they made us in school say, للأبد الأسد إلى الأبد, forever with the Assad, and we want to break away with that. We wanted someone who was not a living human being, who can be made to the level of prophets. And at the end of the protest, I saw blood with knives, and I learned that a protester at least died in a field hospital in the Khaldiya neighborhood. Soon after this, I left Syria voluntarily, and only a couple of months later, in mid-2012, the rebels advanced into eastern Aleppo, taking about half of it. Now, I will talk a little bit about Aleppo, but the significance of this. Syria before 2011 had a population of 23 million. Numbers matter, I believe. 23 million. Aleppo province was about 5 million. Exactly, it was 24% of the Syrian population were in Aleppo province. Aleppo city was estimated at around 3 million. It is the largest city, but if you count with Damascus, if you count the suburbs of Damascus, then Damascus is the largest in that sense. But it's at least the second largest city with 3 million people, with the rebels taking about half of the city. Initially, there was life. It was people suddenly in Eastern Aleppo in 2012 could say what they wanted. They could organize. There was civil society, but soon barrel bombs started to fall onto the city, and the population trickled out of about 1.5 million in Eastern Aleppo. Half of the half of the 3 million of Aleppo, 1.5 million in eastern Aleppo. Of those, by December 2016, only 34,000 had remained, and everybody had. You were fleeing for your life. This regime was not letting go for 4.5 years, bombing every neighborhood. That we lived in Qadi Askar, this neighborhood in the old city, in an old house that I helped my father renovate when I was young. He would give me little tasks at the age of 10, and all the mosques near us were destroyed with these barrel bombs. About half of the neighborhood was either fully destroyed or very severely damaged, that they were unlivable. And our own house got destroyed in the very final moment of the fall of Eastern Aleppo to the Syrian regime in 2016. And 2 days before the Syrian regime advanced, it was a kind of bomb to clear the way for them to advance further. And the 34,000 remaining people, they all were all bussed out of the old city in the infamous green buses that were used. They were public transport buses used all across Syria, and they were used to bus out all the remaining residents. Many of them are fighters and families of fighters, but many others, and a lot of them are my friends, were citizen journalists or civil society activists or people or actual just residents. Some of my neighbors were still in Aleppo at that point and were among those who had to leave. This is how the Syrian regime would advance. And why is this all significant? What I'm saying is that with the fall of this Syrian regime now, imagine about 1.5 million, of whom very few had managed to return, 100 to 200,000 people with the regime, under the regime's control. Only 100 to 200,000 people actually went back to their homes in eastern Aleppo. It remains a ghost town. And now suddenly everybody feels safe to come back. All of those who, and I'm just talking about Aleppo, imagine the other cities and towns all across Syria, who have been forced to live in sad tents in Idlib. There have been advancements in Idlib. There has been housing projects supported internationally, but also locally, driven by market demand. But there are also all those tents that were falling in the winter under snow. The kids unable to walk in mud, no schooling, and all of that. All of those can finally feel that they're not under threat going back. Why were they under threat? Primarily because if you happen to be in a certain geography, you're more likely to be accused of being pro-regime. But not just the geography, there is intersectionality of this identity. And I know there are people who are attending here, and I've worked with them on identity-based mass violence, and how the intersectionality of your sect, if you are Sunni Muslim, or if you're not Alawite, but more specifically, you're Sunni Muslim, you are seen as a threat generally. You're more likely to be extra checked, extra harassed, extra persecuted. But also with your politics, if there's any proof that you don't like the president or don't support him or support his enemies, then you could disappear behind bars. And if they don't disappear you behind bars, they forcibly conscript you to the army. If you are a male who doesn't have another male brother, like it has to be a brother. So if you're not an only son to your mother, you have to serve in the military. And this service is more like servitude. You're really, and this has always been the case, but even more so. Instead of 1.5 years in Assad's service, now you had to stay. It felt like indefinitely, but they started to release people after 8 and 9 years of service, killing their own people. So of course nobody was going to come back, to that. Add to that the corruption and the economic mismanagement. All of this is changing. All of this now, at least the persecution. We don't know yet about the economy. We have some signs from how Idlib was run by Hayat Tahrir Sham, HTS, but we know for sure, and that's why I view it as a very positive thing. And I was talking to you before this, when we were preparing for the call, how everybody around me was apprehensive at the beginning, except I was extremely excited, because I thought nothing could be worse than feeling you can't be where you belong. But of course we are apprehensive. Of course we are afraid now that people not every kind of people will feel safe to go back. Some minorities, they have been receiving immense reassurances, and they've been living up to those promises largely. Some people don't feel this is their the face of Syria that they want, and we respect that and understand that. I personally have started to have fears of the political transformation in Syria. Are we looking at a Syria that will start to look like Iran, where we have the supreme leader, Ahmad al-Shara, instructing a government from behind the scenes? Are they go in this caretaker government, as Mr. Wathiq was saying just before the call? It's composed completely of these of this rebel group, which I don't think is a great sign. But I've been talking to many people. I've been talking to friends and family in Aleppo, and I've seen scenes of celebration. And I asked my friends, "Are people just what's going on? Like, is this just?" And they said, "No, this is real joy. People are excited, and with this government, people think let them take their time. Democracy might not be the very first thing on every person's mind, or at least not in the way we see it. People think now it's a good chance to give them, even if without guarantees of democracy and future handover of powers, they want now to see what these will do." Yeah, that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you very much, Al-Hakam, for providing a first-hand testimony and such a detailed description of how things were, and to put in some perspective to what we're now being able to read and to listen in these very first stages of transition, right? Now, to give us an accurate and contextualized profile on Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, its evolution through the years, and provide us probably with some insights on what to expect from them. Let's not forget a designated FTO since 2018. I yield the floor to Dr. Jérôme Drevon. Please,
Thank
Jérôme.
you. Thank you. So it fits very much with the end of the presentation by Al-Hakam. So I will try to present a history, a brief history and the evolution of HTS to understand where we are, what can happen next, and how the group has been transforming over the years. So if we start from the beginning, before HTS, there was Jabhat al-Nusra. So Jabhat al-Nusra, by 2016, had to renounce his ties to Al-Qaeda. There were many reasons for that. First, they did not believe in the strategy or in the idea of global jihad. For them, the enemy was always, the Syrian regime. They thought, why would you attack Western countries while Western countries ultimately in Syria are aligned with the opposition, broadly speaking, in the sense that Western countries had express their desire for a change of regime, regardless of their actions and practical support on the ground. But at the time, the opposition was facing an existential crisis. They were losing Aleppo, and potentially they could have lost everything. I mean, there were real fears about what's next. So they understood that the only solution was to create a united armed opposition inside Syria. But most of the groups, like Ahrar Sham mostly, but then also smaller ones like Falaq al-Sham and those former Free Syrian Army, did not want to join Jabhat al-Nusra because they thought that they would be listed as a terrorist organization internationally. Their members would be pursued, and so it was heading to nowhere. So Jabhat al-Nusra renounced its ties to Al-Qaeda, and then later there were discussions about the future of the opposition, and the discussions led to the creation of HTS in January 2017, which was supposed to include all the groups within the same organization. But ultimately it was a relative failure because only smaller entities joined Jabhat al-Nusra within this group, and other large movements refused to join it, which means that ultimately you had two poles. One pole around HTS and one pole around Ahrar Sham, which by then had integrated many smaller factions previously affiliated to the Free Syrian Army. And so you couldn't have two poles basically ruling the same area, northwest Syria. So that led to internal tensions, clashes, and ultimately it led to the victory of HTS. the victory of HTS can be explained by many reasons. The group was more organized, more cohesive, more willing to impose its direction. When the unity with other groups failed to yield a positive outcome, while Ahrar Sham had been very divided internally. But then, when HTS imposed itself, it decided not to actually expel other groups because it understood that it needed them for the defense of the province. It could not simply, defend all of Idlib by itself, but it needed them. But what HTS decided to do, which has a direct impact over what happened for the past few weeks, was to say, those who are going to govern will be a new government, a civilian government that HTS supports, somehow has large influence over them, but does not fully micromanage because that's not their objective. So that's the Salvation Government that took over Northwest Syria by the end of 2019, when HTS imposed its domination. Then what HTS imposed on other factions is to give away their governance prerogatives. So many of the factions were also having their courts of justice, prison system, basic social services, checkpoints, and so on. So HTS imposed that all of these things that are related directly to civilian governance would go to a Salvation Government, and then other factions would be allowed to stay, but only as armed organizations. And so the last real challenge was 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, when the non-official ceasefire started between Turkey and Russia by the spring of 2020. By that time, the opposition was quite aware that militarily they were quite weak. They could not actually defend the province by themselves, and only Turkish assistance actually helped them to survive, and help them remain in the province without a large regime/Russian repression. So what they decided was to say they could not continue this way, but they thought that the domination of the civilian government by HTS would be an opportunity for them to restructure their organizational military brigades. So it means they reconstituted their brigades in different alwiya across the front lines. They improved the training, improved their weaponry, improved command and control, improved also the existence of a common shared leadership within the military. So that happened throughout the years. There was increased training with former officers in the military academy, providing guidance. At the same time, this allowed the Salvation Government also to expand its prerogatives. So the Salvation Government, we have to understand it as a civilian entity within Northwest Syria that HTS, supports, but that also includes many people who are not with Jabhat al-Nusra before. The Salvation Government also uses a delegation of power to some extent. So it does not. So it has delegated things in health sector, in the educational sector, and it has tried to integrate a range of actors that might not have been directly involved in the uprising or in the armed revolution, but who wanted to contribute to a governance project. So many young individuals, graduates of local universities, who were religiously committed but without being militants, joined the Salvation Government to try to make it, a more efficient entity. And those are the people that now we are seeing more and more on the media. For example, you see now, I don't know its official position, but the new governor of Damascus has very much its background of somebody who was abroad, an engineer, who came back to Idlib and who joined the Salvation Government. So those are not militants, they're not necessarily ideological, they're often religiously practicing, but not particularly jihadi or anything like that. So HTS has favored this government to structure itself and to gradually have more prerogatives, to centralize everything from the humanitarian sector to even the creation of identity cards, have some relations with foreign countries and so on. At the same time, HTS transformed, religiously speaking as well, thinking that they could not remain on their old, jihadi tenets. So they tried to, on the religious front, become more mainstream to gain acceptance by the population. So they came back to the local school of jurisprudence, the Shafi'i madhab, which is accepted by the population, in a way to be accepted by the increasing part of the population that might not have liked Jabhat al-Nusra in the past, but still, refer to this approach to Islam. At the same time, it was also a way for them to control religion, to say that religion in Idlib should not be under the sway of foreign jihadi scholars that might actually weaken the cohesion of HTS, might oppose some of its choices, and so on. So they brought back religion to its local roots to better control it. And that comes to a point, or that leads to a point that is often misunderstood from outside. There are criticisms about HTS's authoritarianism and control over the political domain in Idlib, which is true to a large extent. There have been protests against some waves of arrests, especially for the past year, that HTS later tried to address to some extent by promising some reforms. So many would point at that and see a contradiction or a tension with the argument that HTS has also become more open to some religious minorities, like Christians and Jews. But to a large extent, is that actually consistent with their position? Their position was to say, religiously, we have to open up to some extent to Muslims to agree with them, including Sufis that are, in large number in northwest Syria, but to religious minorities like Christians, Jews, and so on. So allow for more religious diversity in relative terms, because some constraints still exist, but it's far less, and it's not far less compared to before. It's not comparable to what a jihadi group would do, while controlling more the political domain, which is a more direct challenge because it can challenge, their authority over the province. So more religious diversity with still some important constraints on the political domain, which means that ultimately the group can no longer be described as jihadi. I mean, first of all, it doesn't believe in foreign attacks. Worse than that, it believes that it should nurture alliances with foreign countries, such as Turkey, but also potentially Western countries that have not fully been responsive, but that's a desire of the organization, which goes against all the ideological tenets of jihadis. At the same time, they don't implement ideological principles such as, al-wala wal-bara, that you have to only be faithful to Muslims who believe in your ideas, and you have to take distance from everybody else. So in that sense, they're no longer jihadi, but they remain Islamists. Islam still guides their political and social views, but they do it in a certain context. So in Idlib, there have been attempts, for example, at imposing some stricter implementation of Islamic law, which often was opposed by parts of society, and then gradually HTS also had to make concessions on this front. So now, after the seizure of Damascus, HTS was not the only group. It's HTS and its military alliance with other groups in Idlib, also the Syrian National Army, and those people in the south that were former part of the Southern Front, who brought back, who rammed themselves to fight remnants of the regime and go to Damascus. So now HTS will have to deal with those other groups. HTS is the dominant actor, and we can see it in the sense that it is giving all the orders to other groups. All the general political line comes from them. The prime minister was the prime minister of the Salvation Government, so it's very clear that they are dominating other groups, and other groups can't really oppose that. At the same time, they are saying they're only doing it for 3 months up to March to allow some negotiations. But then I totally understand what Al-Hakam was saying beforehand, to say, does that mean that they will control everything in Syria? And I think it's a complex question. I think, on the one hand, it's understandable that the group, ultimately, as the leading actor of the fall down of the regime, the group has expectations that it will play a predominant role within whatever new structures, governmental structures, take shape in Syria. It's hard to deny them that, in the sense that you're the actor that largely contributes to the fall down of the regime, so you have space. So that's expected. At the same time, they also want to have some continuity to avoid the chaos that we witnessed in Libya before, in Iraq, and so on. They don't want different factions to fight over, parts of the cake, saying, I take this ministry, I take this security service, and so on. So they don't want that. So being in charge allows them to impose more control, because they know that they're going to be judged by exactly what is going on right now. If things go wrong, they are going to be judged more than the other groups. So they have a primary responsibility. But I think that what we have to understand is what happens in terms of their potential control over Syria does not depend only on their behavior. It depends on on the equilibrium that happens between them and their power, but also the power of civil society. To what extent can civil society be relatively cohesive and present demands and try to get concessions from HTS, but also what other foreign actors would do from Gulf countries, from Turkey, Qatar, the Europeans, the Americans, etc., because they also have political leverage over HTS through sanctions, through the listing/delisting of HTS as a group, of its several leaders that remain listed internationally. So basically, it's the equilibrium that takes shape between these different forces that will tell us what happened in Syria. And so I don't think it's credible to expect democratic system to take shape immediately. No, that's just not how it works. It takes time to take shape. What we need in the meantime is something more consensual, whereby there can be a process, a roadmap, including with the creation of a new constitution that can be, broadly accepted by different forces in Syria. We don't want to see what happened when the Muslim Brotherhood took over in Egypt and kind of imposed its own constitution and created a strong popular reaction. There has to be some inclusive process. Elections might happen, but that will take time. We can't rush to elections the way it was rushed, for example, in Libya in the past. The process and rule of law and stability for now is more important. At the same time, it's about empowering, a range of political forces so that we can see some stability in the country. But if you have any specific question again about HTS, evolutions, choices, I would be very happy to respond to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me check that I have my mic on. Yeah. Thank you very much, Jérôme, for such enlightening insights. And as you were saying, you can use the chat feature to send your questions, and our experts, our panelists, will deal with some of those, depending on the time we have at the end of the next speech. Let me welcome again Mr. Wathiq Al-Shalal, who, as I said before, is a political counselor at the Embassy of the Republic of Iraq here in Washington, D.C. He previously, prior to this position, he undertook various responsibilities in the field of counterterrorism at the Iraqi Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course. And Siwath, considering your extensive experience, could you provide us with a picture to complete a bit this very rich panel on the potential regional repercussions of, and if possible, of course, with a focus on the implications of these developments and on the fight against Daesh?
Good morning, everyone. It's so nice. I'm pleased actually to attend this very timely panel, to be with you today to discuss events in Syria and the region. Thank you, Sergio, for this invitation. And what has happened in Syria actually is a huge and unattended by majority of officials, Syria's experts, and has left everybody, as our friend Dr. Harura described it, like once it's in a strategic shock. That's why you find everyone tries to adapt to the situation and take different measures to deal with these events. I think it'd be, for the moment, unfair to judge a take-care government that has like 3 to 4 days in power, and but so far, as I mentioned to you, like in the morning, early morning, that statements and actions are promising. Of course, a lot to be done. So if we go from the Iraqi angle, like Iraq as a neighbor country, sharing around 600 kilometers with Syria, hard impacted by the upheaval in Syria in 2012, and the rising of Daesh, and then all these fights. After all, like had to take preventive measures to secure its borders, and then to make sure that Daesh couldn't surge, especially when it was like a year ago, start to have like different activities in Badia behind the government like lines and where Russians were at that time, and then the instability within the situation in northeast Syria with all what we have, Al-Hol camp. At that time, it was 75,000 people, and then you have around 10,000 FTFs in different prisons in Syria, northeast, and then all these dynamics which can kind of changeable. So yearly after Baghuz, Iraq is took the initiative and then took a decisive decision that we need to deal with it by repatriating Iraqi FTFs. So that year we took back around 900 to 1,000 FTFs, and then the year later we started the process and we engaged with the UN in a comprehensive plan, to repatriate our people from Al-Hol. So far, we have repatriated around 10,000 people, and then the process of rehabilitation, reintegration, to be and then we continued even the FTF repatriation, and then prosecution, in different Iraqi courts, and there but majority of them were prosecuted. So the fear last year started when movements by different groups, and then the RTS, the SDF future was not that clear, and then this region is not stable. So we started a process that could accelerate repatriation, and then we in every single global coalition meeting, we will call countries to take to assume their responsibilities toward their citizens, to repatriate, rehabilitate, reintegrate them, and then for sure accountability for those who committed crimes. Now Iraq, from the start of these events from Aleppo, we started these kind of dynamic movements, our government engaged in different meeting discussions with neighboring Arab countries, neighboring countries, and then the global coalition to examine best ways to engage with the Syrian government without hindering its movement, at the same time to make sure that no interference with its internal policy. At the same time, Daesh would feed itself by wherever there is a vacuum, there is a chaotic situation. So we have reinforced our borders. We doubled down the security personals, and then we took different steps and measures, to provide security on all the areas close to our borders, and we are examining ways how to deal with Al-Hol. The future of this northeast especially is not sustainable, so we need to take proactive measures to facilitate the return of what we have, the rest of Iraqis, and then to make sure that ISIS within benefited from these moments. And whenever I'm thinking about this area, I remember Daesh attack 22, I guess, early January or February on the prison in Hasaka, Sana'a prison. So all in all, actually, we need to deal with this these events like a step-by-step approach. I guess the government has expressed its in different repeatedly that we're open to deal with the new government, but we need to see acts, and then intentions are not enough. But I guess we're gonna arrive to a point that we could help and bring assistance to Syrians that suffered a lot in I wouldn't take so much from time. Thank you, and I'm open to any question or elaborating on any point that you want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wathiq. Let me remind you, as I mentioned before several times, that we are opening now the Q&A session. And before we proceed to the audience questions, which I once again encourage you to send through the chat feature, I would like to direct a brief question myself to each of our speakers. I beg you to be concise in your answers to leave room for questions from the audience. These are questions that I am sure we could discuss for hours, but let's try to be kind of concise and to the point. Al-Hakam, my question to you would be, how do you see the rebuilding process happening in Aleppo? And of course, you can extend that to other war-torn areas of Syria, especially considering the economic, the social, and political constraints. How do you think how could local actors contribute to this process in a way that it ensures long-term stability and inclusivity as well?
Yeah, that's an amazing question, Sergio, and it was my area of expertise for working with the Aleppo project for many years now, and there was a tendency to always look at the geopolitical powers, to look at this actor, that actor, money coming from abroad or not, and ignoring the one fact that the very beneficiaries of this reconstruction were not where the very people whose homes have been destroyed weren't there to take their homes if they were to be rebuilt in the past. And this is what's changed now. Not only can they benefit from reconstruction, they can now participate in this reconstruction. People are going back already. I have many friends who have actually, now they are in Syria. They moved from Turkey, from other parts of Syria, going back to Aleppo. And all the elements you mentioned, the social, so that pertains to the social. People are resilient, are flexible, they are resourceful, they know they can pool their resources. Even if you didn't give them any support, they'll find a way. That's their home, that's their property, they'll do something with it, whereas before they couldn't. But then there are the transnational dimensions, like you mentioned, international sanctions, for instance. That was a big impediment for doing anything with Syria, moving money into Syria. So we hope that this will change. So we look forward to at least two changes at the moment. We want the government to come into a shape that helps the international community lift the sanctions on Syria. There are sanctions that target individuals. I believe these should stay. These are suspects of war crimes, etc. But there are Syria-wide sanctions that by default apply on any Syrian. Once these are removed, there will be a change in Syria, and then there is support for the reconstruction effort. Like you said, there are many forces involved in how this country got to where we are and how it got destroyed, and I believe Syria deserves some support to rebuild as well. And one last point pertains to the direction of this government. What we have witnessed in Aleppo, in Idlib, when they governed, they left it to the free market. And that's what they have been signaling now. The HTS government, they have been saying, we will try to open up the market. So they want a kind of liberal market. We don't know yet whether by that they mean that the government will pull out all its responsibilities and there will be no state-sponsored reconstruction, or just leave it to NGOs, right? Or humanitarian support or whatever. So that's an important question to be. I believe this liberal market, free market approach doesn't give justice to everybody, and it favors some people over others.
Okay. Thank you very much. I already have 8 questions. Just a quick thing for the panelists. I think you can also see them if you want to address any of those specifically, just let me know. If not, I'll read them to you or address to you as I see fit. My question to Wathiq, disturb maybe the order, will be uh, so the global coalition against Daesh has played undoubtedly a significant role in curbing the group's influence in recent years. In the context of Syria's transition, what should be the coalition's priorities to ensure that the Daesh does not exploit the instability to regroup or to expand its operations?
Yeah, actually, the good thing about the global coalition that every single year there is, an update and then guidelines, and then it's updated every single year with the political director meeting, and it's adopted by the ministerials. And then, the global coalition is not meant to be security, military, line of efforts only, but it combines like stabilization, FTFs, like foreign fighters, and counter and finance. So it plays a huge role in stabilization in Iraq and Syria. So it could continue these projects in both countries. Like we're calling Iraq and Syria the core, and a big focus on both sides. And then by maintaining the presence, and then um, following wherever Daesh activities like or hubs, and all these sleeper cells, we try to be activated again. It would be key, and then for sure continue what they started to, on stabilization in northeast. It might be spread to neighboring region in northeast Syria, or even to continue till Damascus. Depends on how the leadership of the coalition would posture itself, and in next these days, coming days.
Thank you very much. So, of course, this is the program on extremism. So most of the questions have to do with HTS and other Islamists. So I'll start by pulling one question from the audience instead of having mine to allow more space for interaction. To address it to you, Jérôme, which will be with the prominence of Islamists like HTS and others. If they water down their ideology, is there any chance of Talibanization of Syria? And by Talibanization, I understand that will be remaining Islamist, but maybe allowing some space to or the more extremist organizations or the global jihadists to use the country as a rebase.
I think the issue of foreign fighters is going to be challenging for HTS. I mean, basically what has happened before, up to a month ago before this new battle, is that HTS gradually clamped down on foreign fighters. So what it did is to first clamp down on Al-Qaeda and forbid the organization from acting. And actually, the organization has not participated in this because it's forbidden to act. It's been dismantled de facto. Islamic State was destroyed and had no presence. But then what it did with other foreign fighters, it forced them to work under its military brigades to better be able to control them. So foreign fighters participated in a limited number because there are not that many of them anymore. We speak potentially of hundreds, at best 1,000 or 2,000. So they are still part of it. But they have been in the past under control of HTS, which was easy in the northern province of Idlib because it's a small area. Everything is known. They have full security control over the place. But now it's going to be a challenge as well for the organization. What's next with those people? Because HTS will still want to control them in the sense that they have more radical ideas than the group, and foreign countries will expect some solution. You can't continue to have them in your military brigades if jihad is is ending in the sense that now, you have full control over the country. So there will need to be innovative solutions about them. And we can think of two extremes. One, repatriation to their countries, like Uzbeks to Uzbekistan, Europeans to their homeland and so on, which is quite an extreme position because some countries will, harass them and torture them and so on. And the other extreme is just to keep them as such in Syria. But we can think of many, many solutions in between. There are disarmament, resettlement in some areas, maybe resettlement in other countries, and so on. So there will be discussions about it, and they will have to address some of these fields. So I think the comparison with the Taliban is mostly relevant on that front, because in terms of regulations, HTS still believes in Islam as a political system, but they are very, very different from the Taliban's tradition, which is Deobandi within a framework that's well defined in terms of governance and its practices that HTS simply does not have. HTS does not have a clear view of how to govern a state. It's more trying to understand how the context is changing and what we do within this context.
Thank you, Jérôme. Just to try to distribute more or less equally the questions, I'll read the next one, I believe. Oh yeah. Probably you, Hakam, are the best suit to answer it. What factors allowed the Al-Assad regime to survive for so long, despite the regime being a minority ruling the majority?
Fear, and his tight grip is absolutely the biggest factor. You can control people with fear for very long, and it's proven to be able to do that. When the protests started, there was backlash from many who have nothing to do with the Syrian regime. They just didn't want the regime's ire, falling on everybody. And that made so many people think that they need to take the initiative to defend the regime or to say no to the revolution. And I think that played a big role. Then, of course, he was propped up with the Syrian revolution. It looked like he might fall. So apart from the sectarianism, I mean, the sectarianism was both a surprising thing. How come he didn't fall despite his sectarianism? But actually, his sectarianism helped him stay, because he made sure that all the top positions go to his communal networks. Often, when you're interviewed for top jobs, it's not what are your qualifications, it's more like which village you're from, and by that often is meant which village in the Syrian mountains, coastal mountains, you are from, and how related are we to each other, and how much I can trust you accordingly. So it wasn't based on there was no accountability. It wasn't based on the general interest and the general benefit of the population. And of course, he was propped up with regional powers such as later Iran and Russia and Hezbollah. But I also have to say that both leaders have some charisma. I think Hafez al-Assad more than Bashar al-Assad, and they use that charisma. But of course, if you have the media alongside you, you will be charismatic, because you build this image into the minds of everybody. So the power of ideas is important here, and the idea they're doing, that they are the saviors of the nation, they are defenders of the whole Arab nation, not just Syria. So you have supporters of the Assad regime from outside of Syria. You have supporters from all across the Levant, everywhere, thinking that he's the bastion of resistance against Israel. And that all was just cardboard, as we've seen.
Thank you. This one, I'll just read it and let me know who of you would like to answer it. Maybe several of you. What direct role will Turkey have in the post-conflict aftermath?
I mean,
please, Jerome. No. Okay, shukran. I just want to say that I think everybody benefits just by opening up these roads. Syria and Iraq, they both, and I'd be interested in Wathik's view on, if Iraq is a land trade route, if lorries and trucks go from the Gulf, Dubai, Saudi, through Iraq, through to Turkey, but they definitely did through Syria in the past. And by that opening up, it would relieve Turkey, relieve Jordan economically, Lebanon, everybody would benefit. Turkey has friends, Turkey in Syria now. Turkey has some popularity in Syria now. It's definitely a big win, and we do see the very first cellular networks operators are actually now operating in the north of the country in Aleppo with Turkish telecommunications networks. So with certain subscription types, you get an actual calling, not just internet data, and the number you code is the international code is actually 0090. So it's Turkey's country code that's being used in Syria now under HTS, even though they're not the biggest stooges of Turkey. There's the Syrian National Army in just north of them, the other rebels, but even HTS. So there are some businessmen who are coming back from Turkey. Some of them are now dual citizens. Aleppo's factories are close to Turkey. There will be a lot of benefits, whether through nepotism and cronyism or just by the whole region being better, I believe.
I agree with you. I think Turkey has important leverage and interest now in Damascus because to a large extent, I mean, HTS is independent from Turkey. HTS had some security coordination with Turkey, but it's nothing like a proxy, like state proxy relationship. It has nothing to do with this. I mean, there has been lots of tension over the years. When HTS wanted to go to the north of Aleppo, Turkey opposed it. They were nearly clashing on the ground. So it's really not a proxy or symbiotic relationship the way like Hezbollah and Iran, for example, related. It's nothing to do with that. At the same time, the victory of HTS and the armed opposition is also seen as, something Turkish supported. So that means that what happens in Damascus, if it happens poorly, will also, reverberate on Turkey. People might blame Turkey if things go wrong. So Turkey has obviously an interest in the situation stabilizing in Damascus. So, and Turkey, has been also giving advice to the group. So Turkey will also try to influence the group in certain ways. At the same time, a big part of the leverage that Turkey had over HTS, but also over other group, is going to narrow down because now HTS becoming part of the governing structures of the state has new interest as a state. And they can also nurture new ties with foreign countries, with Western countries, etc., without necessarily as much consideration for Turkey. So Turkey is there, had a prevailing role, but it can also weaken just because, now other countries are going to get in, and HTS and the government and anybody associated with it will also have their own interest to play out. And I think Turkey is very cognizant of this.
It was me who was silenced. I apologize for that. You shouldn't have signaled that. I was saying, Wathaq, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, actually, it was mentioned like in everybody interest to better engage with Syria, but I guess it took whether Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, and even Arab countries and Europeans, all these countries who were helping Syria by sending humanitarian aids through different crossing borders during the crisis, and then I guess now we need to deal with the urgent needs so quickly. I guess lack of gasoline and all these energy things, and then humanitarian aids, and then we need to think about how to help Syrians to rebuild their basic services, infrastructure. That I remember 2012, I guess, end of or mid 2013, the expectation of destruction and the cost of rehabilitation exceeded $80 billion at that time. Where like the second year of the events and turmoil in Syria. not mentioning now. It's been like I don't know 12 years. So a lot to be done, and I guess the role of international communities is paramount, and centric in this process.
Okay, Jerome, I think the next one is for you. What is the likelihood of HTS splitting into factions? Or maybe to put it in another way, if I may, how many sensibilities or different sensibilities or nuances uh, can we find inside HTS?
To a large extent, what's interesting with HTS is that it's really the leadership that has taken the group out of its previous radicalism by trying to create institutions and controlling its more radical members, religious scholars, etc. And Giuliani had enough authority to impose that, but also was strong enough to punish those who disagreed with it. So now I think he has built a lot of capital within the organization as somebody who has led them to victory. And that's going to give him a lot of weight, in terms of imposing his choices, because people inside the group are going to respect that. Maybe they disagreed with some of his choices in the past. The quasi-alliance with Turkey, outreach to Western countries, etc. They might have disagreed with that, but ultimately it led them to victory. So he has a lot of capital for that. But there are still people inside the group, including like the foreign fighters who are integrated into its military units, that maybe will not agree about the direction that the governance is taking. At the same time, there are no prominent commanders that can, gather these people. They don't really have weight or independent resources or anything like that. So I think he will be able to contain them and canalize them. And I think what he did in the past is positive in that regard. But other countries will ask for clear insurance in that front. But I still don't expect HTS to split. I think it's cohesive enough now to survive the challenge of governance.
Thank you. Hakam, I believe you're the best suit for the next one. Could you highlight what are the most, according to you as a Syrian citizen, the most pressing issues for the Syrian government to deal with?
I believe it's the form of state that they're going to transform Syria into, and these are the key moments to watch out for, I believe, because it's very likely that we will have some form of, well, there will be two scenarios: either path dependency, that we set foot on a certain path and we find ourselves just depending on it forever, or there could be a clash to that path, and there would be disagreement. So if it's a good path, hopefully there won't be too many divisions in the country. There won't be renewed violence. So the responsibility, most pressing issue at the moment, is to quickly look together collectively, not just by HTS, but to invite all parties to look at a new constitution, to hold fair elections, and really allow the country to heal.
Okay. Siwathaq, as a diplomat, although an Iraqi one, I think you're the best suit to answer the next one. What effects or how will a second Trump administration or this second Trump administration look regarding U.S. foreign policy towards Syria in the coming years?
Actually, you should ask like an American diplomat, and it's unclear whether what's going to be the stand of the U.S. Foreign policy towards Syria. But I guess they would I think that they would continue what it's been done. The coalition would stay for a while just to make sure that ISIS wouldn't resurge. Trying to help Syria on humanitarian aspect. Not that much of what I'm thinking, but I guess the U.S. has a major role in the stabilization of Syria and getting along with its neighbor, reshaping its even foreign policy, and then how to deal with other countries or international, community.
Okay, that was a tough one. I apologize for that. Probably nobody knows at this point. Jerome, what was the role, I believe, or the significance, the question reads, of Jabhat Fatah Hashem during the creation stages of HTS?
I mean, basically, when because we've met the leadership of HTS many times in Idlib, for them, Jabhat Fatah Sham was not a change, was not an organizational change. Fatah Sham was just to signal that the group was not linked to Al Qaeda anymore. So it was exactly as Jabhat al-Nusra, but with a new name. But then HTS is very different, or was supposed to be different, because HTS was not supposed to be an organization, but was supposed to be the structure that would include all the groups. But this failed, and only 4 little groups joined HTS. So there's a difference between Fatah Hashem and HTS in the sense that HTS was supposed to be something different, but it only became something really different over the years as it transformed and became the governor of Syria and so on. But I might add, I see something in terms of the delisting of HTS as an FTO. So in terms of the questions, there have been there are many discussions between countries, including Western countries, the UN, and so on, about the delisting of HTS. This was somehow a taboo question in the past because there was no clear incentive. Why would other countries delist HTS, even though it had effectively split from Al-Qaeda and Islamic State? Now the question is being posed because HTS will most likely have a prominent role in whatever government takes charge of Damascus. And so now what would possibly need to happen is a clear delimitation of what are the expectations of other countries, Western countries, Arab countries in the region, and so on. What are the expectations in terms of governance in order to reach this outcome? So it means that first, you also have to speak to the group. You cannot, just ignore it the way it happened in the past. Listing an organization does not actually prevent to discuss with it. You can say that they are quote-unquote terrorists, but you still have discussions with this organization, the way the US speaks to the Taliban or to Haqqani, for example, in Doha. This is not an impediment. So there need to be first discussions and then an assessment of what are the criteria or expectations of Western countries, and then most likely a delisting. But this is something complex, but that can happen because of the newness of the situation in Damascus.
Okay. Al-Hakam, just in case you know, because it's been on the news, how big of a societal issue has narco trafficking been in recent years in Syria? And how much of an issue do you foresee it to be, going forward?
It has been a big issue for Syria because it was concentrating bad money in the hands of the Syrian regime and its gangs, basically. And so it's great that it's now gone. Other countries have been impacted heavily receiving these, and it angered some countries very much, and they thought that normalizing with the Syrian regime could help them talk the Syrian regime out of producing. Actually, we know that they were produced by some of the regime top men themselves, and supported and given guarding by Maher al-Assad, for instance, the brother of the president. And Jordan was one of those who was so angered by it, and it has a local impact on them. It is destroying sectors of the youth, and it will be decimated. That's my expectation. I do not think it will continue under HTS, and it needed state patronage for it to be done at such a large scale. And I also want to mention Syrian Democratic Forces held areas in the northeast. They were also suffering from it. So other Syrians who had nothing to do with making of these drugs now will be relieved from these too.
Okay. Next question could be, I mean, you can just let me know if you want to answer it. What do you think about the future relations between Iran and the Axis of Resistance and Syria? What shape could that adopt?
I think my colleagues are better suited to answer it.
Yeah, I guess like when you go back to the 2012, 13, um, much of the conditions that brought Iran and other factions that related to it, it was to defend, for example, the shrine of Sayyid Zainab, and then to prevent any attack or that this wave of violence would spread and to reach in different countries. I guess since as we mentioned at the beginning that all these good steps taken by the caretaker government trying to convince everybody that we are taking care of all minorities, shrines, whatever. So I guess one of these big elements would be it's solved already, and then I guess next steps for the government to prevent Daesh and other extremist group, to threaten other nations and or to be a safe haven, like Syria as a safe haven, would bring other countries or bring them to engage in different way. I guess even the way that the new president, the Iranian one, is projecting the new Iranian foreign policy would I guess direct their relationship with Syria in a different way, in a way that mutual respect, and I guess they could go in a positive way in both sides. It wouldn't be the same engagement and maybe intervention like before.
Thank you. Do you want to weigh in, Jérôme?
Yeah, I think when we see the signs that HTS has sent to the Russians, for example, even before taking over Damascus, saying we could be, you could have a role in the future of Syria if you let Bashar al-Assad down, shows that there is some pragmatism in how they conceive foreign relations. So I would not exclude them at some point to even have some type of diplomatic relations with Iran. But I think what matters for them would be to prioritize their own interests. And their own interests means, reconstruction, economic support, and so on. And regardless of what you do and your position as a government of Syria and whoever is going to take part of the government, Russia and Iran are not going to contribute to reconstruction. They have not in the past when the regime was still in power. So it's very unlikely that they're going to do it now. So whatever government takes place in Damascus will probably prioritize countries that can actually help them. So that would be mostly Western countries, potentially some Gulf countries. We think of the Qataris, but potentially also beyond the Emirates and the Saudis. It's very unclear what could be their relations, but I would not exclude that, they could have relations with them. So can they down the line have interactions, diplomatic interactions, and I mean, even normal relations with Iran? It's not to be excluded. It will certainly happen at some point. At the same time, those relations will be very, very different from what preceded, because a new government in Damascus will not allow for Syria to become the place where weapons go to Lebanon, for example, to Hezbollah. That would be a clear red line, not only for the government because of how much the same population has paid in terms of the price for these relations, but also because Western countries will not accept it. So at best, they can have normal relations with them, but be allies the way it happened in the past. I don't think that's even possible to imagine.
Okay. Yeah, Hakam, I believe. Several European nations have suspended Syrian asylum applications. How do you interpret it? What does this mean for post-Assad Syria?
Yeah, they say it's a temporary suspension, and they say in Germany, for instance, that this is while they have a new assessment of the situation, because asylum cases were being decided upon based on the German government's understanding of the situation in Syria, and now they don't have a full understanding yet. So they claim this is while they can know what to judge these cases against. But there's a clear direction that they'd like to give fewer of these cases. They could put people in a limbo for a long time, which would be very bad for eventually what kind of citizens these people become in Germany if they end up staying and living when they've had long periods of unemployment, inability to access any support such as learning the language, local languages. Yeah, that's just broadly. I mean, going forward, going forward, it will be hard to judge, right? We will all watch, like, what will happen in a year. Will Syrians be granted asylum or not? I personally would hope that Syria will be a country that doesn't just blankly categorize us as people in need of asylum. And I think most Syrians feel that way too. But there might be cases of people still suffering some kind of persecution. We would have to wait and see.
Okay. Yeah, one last question. What prompted the HTS led coalition to make the decision to march towards Damascus?
It was not a decision that they made. I mean, initially, the idea was more to attack in the north around Aleppo, because there have been attacks by there had been at the time attacks by the regime and allied forces against the province of Idlib. So the initial rationale was really to push back at that and maybe to push towards Aleppo, because Aleppo was an objective, but more in the midterm. But then everything happened because the military dynamics took over, in the sense that they pushed the front lines, the regime crumbled, then fell, then they took over Aleppo, and then they understood that the regime was much weaker than expected. So then, they continued. So then they went to Hama, then they went to Homs. Then people in the south rose up and went to Damascus. So it was something that was really unplanned. And there was no central plan or strategy to take Aleppo. It happened because the regime was much weaker than expected, and so as long as they could push, they just pushed.
Okay, I mean, it seems to me that while we cannot predict the trajectory of events, it's clear that there are a lot of issues that require ongoing attention and definitely thoughtful analysis. Today's conversation is probably just one out of many happening these days, but it was our very own uh, in the broader dialogue about what's going on in Syria and its immediate future. And I hope it serves as a catalyst for continued reflection and hopefully also action. I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their valuable insights, as well as, of course, our very interactive audience for their engagement and thoughtful questions. Of course, also very big thank you to our technical team for their impeccable organization. We just hope this has been engaging and informative for everybody. It goes without saying that we look forward to welcoming you all again soon. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the Programs on Extremism newsletter to stay updated on future events, activities, and publications. And you can also, of course, follow us on the usual social media, Twitter at GWUPOE and YouTube. And well, thank you very much.